Hey everyone, excited for the session today. My name is Brendan Karp, and we're going to be talking about how government gets technology solutions. I have Riya Patel with me today from Dcode. And Dcode is one of the preeminent forces, really, as I think many of you know, about bringing technology into government. Everything from the earliest stage of startups through growth stage companies and driving innovation, both within the DoD and a lot of the other civilian agencies too. I'm excited because I think Riya and I today are going to talk about and have an open, honest conversation about what's working, maybe a little bit of what isn't, but hopefully everyone gets some takeaways both on the government side and on the industry side of how we can kind of all drive this forward together. Before I shift to Riya to give her background, since she's primarily the thought leader here for us today, I'll share a little bit about myself and how I come at the role. I've been fortunate enough to get involved with DEF since the beginning of this year. And my background is all in the startup and the venture space, previously building a company that invested in early stage startups in partnership with large corporations and driving partnerships between the two, but also doing the same exact thing with a lot of government agencies like Homeland Security and others. So I come at things from more of the venture and the startup operational founder angle. But have experienced many of the same pain points on my end, both as an investor and an operator that I think we're going to talk about today. Riya, with that, I'll turn it over to you to give a little bit about your background.
Thanks, Brendan, and super excited about the conversation. Brendan and I really tried to think about questions and very practical kind of experiences that we could share to elucidate some of the pain from both angles, some of the gov side and the tech side, about working together and really focusing on the angle of the procurement process and acquisitions at large. So I'm Riya Patel. I'm the senior manager at Dcode for all of our government work that we do at Dcode. And like Brendan said, Decode's sole mission is to get better tech into government. And specifically, we work with high growth commercial tech companies that wouldn't normally touch federal work with a 10-foot pole. But really, it's an interesting and exciting market for them. And Decode's sole purpose is to make that market accessible and accelerate that to meet the demands of obviously a high growth tech company. So we started off on the acceleration side and really helping tech companies understand how to navigate the wonderful world that is federal. And a big piece of that is acquisitions and procurement and compliance. And then as Dcode kind of evolved over the years, and this is where I come in, we got a lot more interest and demand from government asking us, hey, everything you teach tech companies, could you teach us? Because we need to be better buyers and enablers of commercial technology as well. And so now Dcode is at a really interesting kind of nexus of helping tech companies understand how to be better enablers and customers for government, helping government understand how to be better buyers of commercial technology, and also helping the existing industrial base understand how they can better access and incorporate commercial technologies and some of these really cutting edge tech solutions into their existing work to bring innovation to their own federal customers. So we get to sit at a really cool nexus of all three. I think that's why we've seen such an exciting kind of yield on our work so far and seen actual tech implementations in government in less than 5 years, which is like just the most exciting metric in the entire world. So excited to talk a little bit more about some facets of what I just mentioned about Dcode. And Brandon, I'll kick it over to you to get us started on the conversation.
Yeah, that sounds great. So, and I'm particularly glad that, like you said, you touched a lot of different angles. You touched the startup side and the emerging tech side, the government side, but most importantly, I think that entrenched industrial base side of things, because solving this problem does depend on the three of those parties working together. So let's jump into, I guess, the main question off the bat, right? And then we'll let everything stem from there. What's working and what isn't, right? So kind of give me the state of where we're at today, since you guys are at the center of so much, and how things are working out so far.
Yeah, what an absolutely not loaded question. Way to start off with a hard-hitting one.
We start off hard and we get easier from there.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I'm going to hold you to that. So with regards to what working, and I think in particular, I'm going to try and couch as much of my response as like within the last 2 to 5 years. I think what's really exciting is that you see this appetite from the commercial sector, especially these tech companies that I would say, are a little bit later stage, have really dominated in the commercial market and are now looking at federal as another sector to enter. And I think, especially in the past 2 years, we've seen a lot more appetite and willingness to take federal on and seriously invest resources in trying to engage the market. On the flip side, I think government has gotten a lot better about understanding why they need to work with tech, understanding that working with technology is different from working with a traditional systems integrator or consulting firm. And I mean that from the sense of the buying process, from how they are incentivized, from how they what they actually sell. So no good startup is going to sell you a butt in a seat. And also kind of the speed and agility they need in order to survive. And so I think what's really exciting, and I'm optimistic that this is only going to get better, is that both sides have gotten a lot better about understanding kind of the pain points and challenges and the adaptations they're going to need to work together. This kind of leads me into what's not working, but I also see it as a huge opportunity area for government. And I'm excited because a lot of what the work Dcode is doing right now with government is to turn this opportunity into a success story. It's just around getting better at engaging commercial tech. I think right now I've seen a lot, and I think, Brandon, we're going to hit on this later, but I see a lot of organizations, especially in the DoD, that are doing some really interesting work around trying to better access commercial tech companies and small businesses that normally wouldn't talk to anyone in the DoD. And we've gotten really good at kind of what I would call like tech petting zoos, tech circuses, where you just have a bunch of companies presenting what they do and government's there and is listening. But I think the opportunity area here, what I've seen government working on trying to improve is how do you actually drive that to implementation? How do you drive that to action? Like, it's great that we have a lot of different avenues to get companies in the door with DoD, and we have all of these different amazing pilots, but what's going to stick and what's going to scale and what's going to sustain, I think is the big question right now, and I think a big challenge area. But again, I'm an optimist, an eternal optimist, and so I see it as an opportunity area that government and tech companies alike have acknowledged over the past couple months and year. And so I think that a lot of resources are going to be devoted to focusing on this. Okay, we've gotten really good at like putting on events to get companies in the door, and now we actually have to get them on contract in a actual timeline that works for the companies and get them deployed on the field.
Yeah, there's two things that you hit on there, and I'll kind of work in order. The first one is the growing appetite from the commercial sector, right? Not only on the company side, but I remember I spent a lot of time in the public safety market about 5-6 years ago when it was really at the beginning of its transformation. And a lot of investors, when a company would walk in the door and say, hey, we want to go after this, they'd laugh, right? Not only would they laugh and say that, I don't want that as a primary use case, I don't even want it as a secondary use case. You fast forward to where we are today, and you see companies and venture firms, meaning like Lux Capital or General Catalyst, launching a dedicated government civic tech vertical that are saying, you know what, we believe in this. We think it's not only a huge market opportunity, but it's an imperative for society for us to put capital into this and not just in the fintech, healthcare, and everywhere else we've been focused on. So I totally agree. And you see that manifesting itself in government first companies. Again, not only companies that are commercial, but also things like Rebellion Defense or Vannevar Labs that are saying, we're making a bet on this market and we want to help solve some of the pressing challenges. You hit on the fact of like how companies are breaking into government, how we're finding these technologies. Let's start there, because this is a multi-step problem, right? There's the discovery part. There's the culture that goes along with that. There's the acquisition problem, right? There's the implementation problem. Let's start on the front end of the funnel, though. How is government finding the best solutions? And on the flip side, how is industry finding their way into government?
Yeah, good question. Definitely gets a little easier than the first question you asked me. So I think from the government perspective first, what I think has been working, and I'll stick with like what I've seen work, and especially with getting the best solution, not just like a solution in the door, has been when government has partnered with industry and like accelerators like Dcodes or other organizations that already have access to the pool of companies. So I think the success rate has gone down when it's just government saying, hey, we're going to do this thing and we're going to look for solutions and just out in the open. And you really just get the same old companies that are noticing and applying and attending those kinds of events. And so really when government looks to the people who already have inroads into that ecosystem of whatever kinds of tech solutions you're looking for, that always, I think, increases the aperture of companies you're hitting and also getting more diverse solution set. I think also I think this is why DIU, as of many organizations in the DoD, even on the civilian side as well, the ones that have been particularly successful, I think, have also understood kind of the art of problem discovery and relaying problems to industry. So the organizations that are really good at getting good and the right solutions in the door, I think, are the organizations that very clearly and succinctly define a problem that is also a problem that happens in commercial sector, right? So that dual use application point, and don't prescribe a solution. I think it gets very difficult to get a lot of industry participation, especially new companies. And I mean that in the sense of new to government, new to just generally the market, or just small businesses that maybe have done some work, but new to certain organization. It gets very difficult for them to understand how they fit into the puzzle, especially like COTS products, if you're so specific on what you're looking for in a solution. So I think the best organizations that have figured out this discovery phase are the ones that succinctly outline a problem, maybe demonstrate a commercial application, and then don't go so in depth on prescribing a solution, but give you enough color and context to understand how you might fit into the solution, or tell industry what the problem is and then let them tell you how. So that's from the government perspective. I think from the tech perspective, it's probably similar. I think some of the companies that have seen the best success rates have, one, capitalized on entry points in DoD, like the SBIR program, at least for the Air Force side, and have learned how to take one small pilot or one small program and replicate that work to turn it into wins, and really leveraging the small amount of work they currently have with government to build their network at the same time they are growing their sales. But that's also easier said than done, right? So I think identifying the right partners and organizations, and we get a ton of companies at Dcode who just want to be like, I just want to know that I have someone there as kind of like a therapist, as someone who understands what I'm going through, who can help me understand how to map the complex landscape of DoD and where my solution or product might fit in, and help me understand how to translate the solutions and the products I do have into applicable and relevant federal use cases. So I think that's the power of partners. And I mean partners both from the sense of organizations like Decodes, but also teaming partners and prime contractors when you're a smaller and newer company.
Yeah. Yeah. And what you were talking about before, I think we tend to have a problem in this market in particular of throwing tech at a problem versus defining what the problem actually is, right? We need artificial intelligence. We need quantum computing. We need blockchain, right? And we very well might, but instead of focusing again on what are we trying to accomplish and what's the outcome and how can we let the solution fold into that, as opposed to, as you're saying, prescribing what's needed, I think we get a lot further over the long run. But let's put that into practice. Okay. So I'm an early stage company or growth stage company. I see that there's a problem. Let's assume that the requirements definition has been done well. I think I have a solution that can help solve something. What's my best route into government, right? And there's obviously the Dcode stance that if you have a partner like that you guys can absolutely help shepherd them through the process. But talk generally speaking about what best practices are. And what I'm really hitting on here is that I think the entry points are really obvious to companies. I can go into SBIR, I can go into DIU, I can have great conversations. Maybe I even get in front of an end user. But how does that translate over to a program of record, right? That's a huge problem, right? Or how do I get in front of the right program manager? Tell me a little bit about the right ways to go about that, whether that's with a partner like Dcode or going and reaching out to teaming partners or incumbent primes or finding the right parts of the organization. What should companies be looking for to be successful in navigating beyond really that front door, or leveraging that front door to the best of its advantages?
Yeah, I'll try and provide some clear, succinct tips of just all I've seen from working with companies on the accelerator. I think one of the biggest things I hopefully could recommend and companies walk away and feel this huge sigh of relief is a lot of companies that spend too much money too quickly in figuring out if federal is right for them and then don't see results are the companies that hire someone to just like share their Rolodex. So we see so many startups and companies that go in and like, oh, I guess I just need a lobbyist to get some wins in the door. Like, you do not need to spend that amount of money just to get someone else's contact list and think that's going to lead to actual contract implementations for you. So I think strategically resourcing and bringing in the right partners is my first tip, because a lot of companies go down the wrong route in that respect and spend a lot of money on a person or a person's network. And then it doesn't actually lead to anything. And you've just sunk a ton of resources and funding. And how are you going to go back to your investor board if you're venture backed and kind of relay that ROI? So that would be my first tip. My second tip would be to acknowledge and spend the time on customer discovery and specifically use case discovery. Because I've seen a lot of our companies that go through the Dcode Accelerator come in thinking they can spend like 1 week in just turning all their marketing materials from commercial into federal. And then they're just going to go out there and all these potential customers are going to understand what they're saying or what they're speaking. And the sales cycle will be pretty similar. Like, no, you got to spend a lot of time before you enter a market, especially the DoD, on understanding the difference between a decision maker, between a buyer, between a user, between compliance and support staff like acquisitions, and what your pitch and messaging looks like for each of those. So I think a lot of companies rush that piece and then they get stuck in the cycle of the same conversations with the wrong people and sinking a lot of budget and time and energy into just chasing down rabbit holes and not understanding their rabbit holes. So I'd say don't skimp on the discovery piece, especially understanding your use cases. And finally, I would say, like there's a reason that these entry routes exist. And so what I really recommend, and this is why organizations like Dcode exist, is that there's no like one true pathway for every company. And so SBIR might not be right for every single company that is looking to enter the DoD as the first entry point, or it might not always be the case that you want to go to a prime contractor and have your entire federal sales strategy be channel and sales. But for some companies, that might totally be the right strategy. And so I think it's also really understanding what metrics you want to demonstrate in your first year, but also what product you're selling and what's important to you in terms of how you like to retain customer experience and customer relationships, because channel and sales is not for every company and every product. SBIR is not for every company and every product. And there's also a ton of other different creative routes you can take. But again, it should be tailored and tweaked depending on your company's federal sales strategy. Was that helpful, 3?
Definitely. And I want to talk, because I think this piece in particular cuts to both sides, right? When you're talking about messaging your solution, like, are you messaging it to the right person in the right way that it's going to appeal to them? On the commercial side, right? If you're a commercial customer or a commercial investor, I think forever you've evaluated, hey, does this company have the team to succeed? Do they have the right business model to succeed? Do they have the right capabilities and solution and product market fit? All those great things. On the government side, historically, though, we focused a lot more on the technical applicability, right? Right solution at the end, right? Like, does this check all the requirements boxes? Great, good to go. Let's try to see if we can engage with them. How are we doing from the government side in terms of evaluating companies? What I would describe as one is kind of quantitative, right? On that technical applicability, the product strength, but also the qualitative factors, right? How strong is the team? Maybe have they raised funding? What's the sustainability of the business model? All those types of things. Does that matter? Is government evaluating that? And then how can companies, on the flip side, message that in the process?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think it depends for the organization on like what their evaluation factors is. But I would say that from the Dcode perspective, we advocate for government to look beyond technical feasibility and like do technical diligence. but also think about business diligence and company diligence. I think that's been one of the reasons a lot of government organizations have kind of got stuck with the wrong partners, if you will, because they haven't looked at the company diligence of like the strength of the founders, understanding the company culture, understanding where federal fits into the larger company's roadmap. We've seen so many organizations go with companies or invest in a company because the solution is really strong. But then in, let's say, 6 months, thing changes for that company and the advisor board decides that, hey, we're going to take all of our resources out of federal. It's not worth us spending all of this money to drastically change the product because we want to go down a different roadmap or it's not helpful for IPO. And so doing the company diligence and the business diligence is really important in demonstrating that you have a technical solution that will sustain and scale with you in the long run. So I think it's really important for that long-term success rate versus the short-term. And I think that sometimes, it doesn't come, I would say, intuitively when you're doing kind of an evaluation from the government side to think about that business diligence. I'd also say that I think it's really important from both the company perspective and the government perspective to think what I call like, at Dcode, we call it like federal diligence, which is all the extra stuff you have to do when you are trying to work with federal. So things like understanding and looking at, especially with DoD work, like government should be evaluating things like, okay, if this company has investment, where's their venture coming from? Who owns the venture that is funding this company? There's a lot around the compliance side and the national security side that usually I've seen when there are blockers to the procurement path. It's because factors like that don't come up early in the contracting piece or the evaluation piece, and then legal blocks it like 3 months down the line of like, hold up, the funding for this funder who is funding this company comes from China. That's a major problem if they're trying to work on classified work. And a lot of times I think companies are also not expecting to be asked questions of that specificity and detail from government. So I think it's like an expect it from the company side, but also for a government side, the earlier you ask yourselves those questions and build that into evaluation, probably the faster your contracting and legal process is going to be when you're actually trying to get the solution in the door.
Yeah. So probably two more questions I think we have time for, and then we'll shift to Q&A format from the audience. The first, because you've touched on this a few different times, and we haven't dove deep on it, is really that existing incumbent, like the incumbent industrial base. I think everyone here recognizes the need to engage them, but also some of the pros and cons of doing that too. So put it on a third party hat, right? If you were to think of it both from the government side in terms of recognizing, look, I have an existing partner here, or maybe another part of DoD or DHS or whatever has a contract vehicle through an existing prime, probably the path of least resistance, but I have some concerns, right? Maybe they're going to take advantage of this. Maybe I won't actually get what I want. And then on the emerging technology company side, right? Am I going to lose control? Is this the right partner? Are they going to steal my IP? There's a whole list of concerns. So I guess from your point of view, how do you think we'll start with the positives, right? So what are the positives there in terms of that working relationship? But how do you think there are successful models of evaluating or mitigating for some of the concerns that both sides of the table might have with that relationship?
Yeah, definitely. And I will say this is probably the biggest aspect of like why Dcode started in the first place and why I think companies have seen value with us is because, to your point, like the amount of, just stuff that is in clauses and teaming agreements and partnership contracts that tech companies wouldn't catch, but it's like such classic incumbent / system integrator, like a traditional industrial based language. And you need someone to flag that for you, negotiate is so important. And it's so difficult for companies to spend the money on lawyers that are good enough to read through all these clauses and catch those kinds of results. So I'd say starting on the positive side, and this is also why Dcode make sure we engage the industrial base. You're right, Brendan. Like it's the fastest way to get to contract, right? And it's also if you're a young, small company that is looking at federal and you get into meetings with government, and usually the last thing they ask you is, how do I get to you? There's no better way to answer that question than say, well, actually, we have access to these 3 vehicles, and this is our partner base, and you can leverage us through any of these partners, and having access to the industrial base. So I'd say it's a really great force multiplier if you have the right partner for federal growth. It's also, government understands how the industrial base works. And so they might not be very comfortable in procuring a COTS solution, but they absolutely know how to leverage an existing vehicle that one of their current system integrators is working with them on. So I think it also gives government a comfort factor, which makes everything go a lot faster. And when you have the right partner, they bring you to the table too. So I wouldn't say it's also just like push and pull, like the right partners. And definitely we've learned this at Dcode too, are also your partners for your whole federal sales journey. And so they can be truly instrumental in kind of demonstrating ROI back to, your C-suite and advisory board if you get the right partners, which leads me to some of the cons. And I think, this is what's really interesting is that oftentimes, and I've seen this with some of the most innovative organizations in government, is government says, oh yeah, let's just go through our existing contract or existing contractor, and contractor X, you work with this small startup to get them onto contract quickly, but they don't actually incentivize the system integrator or that contractor to get that company onto the contract and with the right appropriate terms. So I'd say, like, for the government audience, if you want to leverage the existing industrial base to get amazing commercial tech in the door quickly, you also have to incentivize contractors on why they need to do that, so that it's not something you just totally leave on their hands. Because if they're not incentivized, it's very difficult to get them to do anything interesting or innovative. From my own perspective, and from the tech company side, say that's one of the biggest difficulties of working with prime contractors in particular, is just they can be really difficult to work with when they're not incentivized to bring you in the door. Also, just the amount of flow down clauses from their own prime contracts that lead to subcontracts that might also put a startup out of business is something that's really difficult to discern. And so definitely say, like, there's a lot of ways in which you could get on the wrong path through a prime contractor relationship, but that's also why there are organizations like Dcode and the right lawyers and a lot of people, I think, in the space that are looking to help companies navigate some of the legal nuances and complexities. Because if done right, and if you negotiate right, and oftentimes it just takes a negotiation, you can get the terms they want, and primes are willing to compromise and negotiate. Because it makes, at the end of the day, if they get your technology onto a contract, it makes them look more innovative. It makes them look better for their federal customer.
I'm muted. Okay. Final question. Q&A. If you could answer this in 30 seconds, 30, 45 seconds, where are we going from here? So we've talked a lot about the current. If you had a crystal ball, where do you see things going, and what are you most excited about from your point of view?
Okay, 30 seconds. I'm really excited about the idea that we're now focusing a lot of energy, both from the companies, the tech side, and the government side, on scaling and sustaining pilots and commercial technology. So I think we're kind of moving into this next phase of, it doesn't do anyone service if we are just piloting these little tech solutions and little projects over and over again. We really need to get the enterprise level results. We need to invest money into scaling and sustainment. And so I'm really, really excited that I think in 5 years, sustainment won't just kind of be couched with sustainment of legacy systems, but really sustaining interesting, innovative programs and initiatives and projects with commercial technology. So I think that's where we're headed. I'm really positive that even though there are a lot of challenges and the contracting process is still so slow, and there's a lot of difficulties of getting tech onto contract quickly and deployed, that everyone has acknowledged, from senior leadership to the youngest personnel in the DoD, that it's a challenge and they want to make it better to maintain our competitive advantage. So I'm jazzed. I think there's a lot of opportunity, but we're going to optimize it and turn it into a success story.
Great. All right, let's shift to the audience. I'm sure people have thoughts. So if you want to drop questions in the chat, and we can definitely answer them, and love to hear what you guys are thinking and what's rolling through your mind during all of this.